My grandson's 10th birthday was supposed to be a day of joy, a day to honor his dreams. Instead, my sister Marissa shoved his face into his dream cake, a spaceship he designed to remember his father, who we lost 2 years ago. Despite my warnings, she laughed as his heart broke, and what I did next tore our family apart forever. If you've ever felt the sting of someone trampling on a child's innocence, stay with me. This story will show you how one moment of betrayal can change everything and how standing up for love can rebuild what's broken. I stood in my daughter's backyard in Portland, Oregon, watching Theo, my 10-year-old grandson, beam with pride. His spaceship cake, with its silver frosting and tiny rocket keepsake, was more than sugar and flour. It was a tribute to his dad, my son-in-law, who died in a car accident when Theo was 8. Every detail Theo chose, from the glowing stars to the rocket's red fins, was a piece of his heart, a way to keep his father's memory alive. I warned Marissa, my 56-year-old sister, not to pull her usual stunt. I told her Theo was fragile, that this cake was sacred. She rolled her eyes, said I was too serious. But when her hand pushed Theo's face into that cake, smearing frosting over his tears, I felt a rage I hadn't known in my 65 years. I'm Elowen, a retired librarian who spent 40 years surrounded by stories. But no book prepared me for this. My daughter, Nora, 38, is a nurse with a heart as steady as her hands. She's raised Theo alone since the accident, pouring love into his quiet, imaginative soul. Theo's not like other kids. He sketches constellations in his notebook, dreams of stars, and whispers to his dad's memory when he thinks no one's listening. Marissa, my younger sister, is a real estate agent, all charm and confidence, always craving the spotlight. Her husband, Victor, retired from finance, has spoiled her for decades, excusing her every misstep. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, 80, is our family's anchor, sharp and unyielding, with a wisdom carved from years of loss. That day, as Theo's sobs mixed with the scent of crushed cake, I saw his friends freeze, their eyes wide with shock. Parents whispered, unsure whether to step in. Nora held Theo, her face pale, her hands trembling. Marissa laughed as if a child's pain was a punchline. I stepped forward, my voice low but steady, and said, "Marissa, you've gone too far." She waved me off, but Beatrice's eyes met mine, promising something bigger was coming. This wasn't just a ruined party. It was a desecration of grief, a betrayal of his trust. I knew then I had to act, not just for Theo, but for every child whose heart has been dismissed as a joke. This story isn't just about a cake. It's about what happens when love is tested, when family fails, and when one person dares to stand up. If you've ever had to protect someone you love, you'll understand. Stick with me to see how far I went to teach my sister a lesson and how Theo found his strength. Hit that like button if this hits home, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of courage and healing. In the comments, tell me, how would you protect a child's heart from being broken? Let's start this journey together. I stood in Nora's kitchen 2 months before Theo's birthday, the air thick with the scent of vanilla from her baking. My hands gripped a mug of coffee, its warmth a frail shield against the memory of what Marissa had done. At Nora's own birthday just weeks earlier, Marissa had stormed in, all glitter and laughter, and shoved Nora's face into her cake. Chocolate frosting clung to Nora's cheeks like a cruel mask. Theo, standing in the corner, his small hands clutching a paper plate, had gone pale. His eyes wide and dark held a fear I recognized from my own childhood, when joy could turn to shame in a heartbeat. I warned Marissa that night, my voice steady but sharp, not to touch Theo's birthday. She laughed, her voice ablaze. "You're so dramatic, Elowen, it's just fun." That dismissal lodged in my chest like a splinter. I was 65, a retired librarian who'd spent decades cataloging the world's stories, but none taught me how to protect a grandson from my own sister's cruelty. Theo was different, not just sensitive but tethered to his father's memory. He'd sit for hours, sketching constellations, his pencil tracing the stars he believed his dad now lived among. I caught him once, whispering to a photo of his father, promising to make him proud. His birthday cake, he told me, would be a spaceship, a tribute to the model rocket his dad gave him before the accident. Every detail mattered to him, every swirl of frosting a stitch in his healing heart. I called Marissa the next day, my phone heavy in my hand. I told her Theo's cake was sacred, a monument to his loss. "Don't ruin it," I said, my voice low, pleading. She sighed, impatient, as if I were a child whining over a broken toy. "He's too fragile, Elowen. He needs to toughen up." Her words cut deeper than I expected, not just for their callousness, but for the truth they grazed. Theo was fragile, but not weak. His heart carried a weight most adults couldn't bear. I hung up, thinking I'd made my point, believing she'd respect my boundary. I was wrong, so wrong it aches to admit. The plot twist came a week later, at a family dinner. I'd stepped into Victor's study to grab a book, the door half open, when I heard Marissa's voice, low and mocking. "Theo's too soft," she told Victor, her tone dripping with disdain, "crying over a dead dad. He needs to get over it." Victor chuckled, a sound that twisted my stomach. I froze, my hand on the bookshelf, the betrayal sinking in. My sister wasn't just reckless, she was cruel, dismissing Theo's grief as if it were a flaw. I slipped out, unnoticed, my resolve hardening like clay in a kiln. I wouldn't just warn her again. I'd protect Theo, no matter the cost. That moment haunted me as Theo's birthday neared. He'd spend evenings at my house, showing me his sketches, his small voice bubbling with excitement about the cake. "It's got to have a rocket, Grandma," he said, his eyes bright, like Dad's. I nodded, my throat tight, promising him a perfect day. But Marissa's words echoed, a warning I couldn't shake. I saw her at family gatherings, her smile too wide, her confidence a mask for something colder. I began to watch her closer, my librarian's eye for patterns catching the way she deflected blame, the way Victor always backed her. I knew then that Theo's birthday would be a battleground, not just for his joy, but for his right to grieve. The dread grew heavier each day, like a storm cloud I couldn't outrun. I told Nora what I'd overheard, and her face crumpled, not with surprise, but with exhaustion. "She's always been like this," Nora said, her voice soft but firm. "But Theo doesn't deserve it." We agreed to keep Marissa in check, to guard Theo's day like sentinels, yet deep down, I feared my sister's need to be the center of everything would shatter the fragile hope Theo carried. I lay awake at night, my mind tracing the lines of his sketches, praying I could shield him from the pain I knew was coming. The backyard of Nora's Portland home shimmered with starlight that afternoon. Blue and silver streamers hung like comets, catching the breeze. Theo, my grandson, stood in his astronaut costume, his face glowing brighter than the sun. At 10, he carried a quiet wonder, his eyes tracing the spaceship cake Nora had spent weeks perfecting. Its silver frosting gleamed, a tiny rocket keepsake perched at its center, a replica of the one his father gave him before the crash. That rocket was Theo's talisman, clutched during sleepless nights when grief came calling. I watched him adjust his helmet, his small hands steady, his smile a fragile orbit around his hope. Nora had outdone herself. Cardboard planets spun above the tables, and 8 of Theo's friends, faces painted with glittery stars, laughed as they played a game of cosmic treasure hunt. I stood by the grill, my heart full, believing we'd crafted a sanctuary for Theo's joy. I'd warned Marissa again that morning, my voice low over the phone, each word deliberate. "This is Theo's day. Don't touch his cake." She laughed, a sharp, careless sound. "Relax, Elowen. I'm just here to celebrate." Her tone grated, but I let it go, trusting the day's magic to hold. Marissa arrived at 3:00 p.m., her red SUV screeching into the driveway. She stepped out in a sequin jacket, her boots clicking like a countdown. "Where's my star boy?" she shouted, arms wide, drawing every eye. Nora glanced at me, her face tight. I nodded, moving closer to Marissa, my librarian's calm masking the pulse in my throat. "Remember what I said?" I whispered. She waved me off, her smile too bright, and joined the kids, her laughter drowning theirs. I stayed vigilant, my eyes never leaving her, sensing the storm beneath her charm. The cake cutting came at 4:30. Nora set the spaceship on the table, its candles flickering like distant stars. Theo stood before it, his friends circling, their voices rising in a sweet, uneven chorus of happy birthday. He closed his eyes, lips moving silently, likely wishing for his dad to see this moment. I felt a lump in my throat, knowing how much this cake meant, how it carried his father's memory. Then, in a flash of sequins, Marissa lunged. Before I could move, she shoved Theo's face into the cake. Frosting splattered, the rocket toppled, and a candle grazed his cheek, leaving a faint red mark. The rocket, his dad's gift, cracked in two, its pieces sinking into the ruined cake. A gasp rippled through the yard. Theo froze, frosting dripping from his chin, his eyes wide with shock. Then he sobbed, a sound raw and jagged like a star torn from the sky. His friends stood stunned. Little Mia began to cry. Nora rushed to Theo, wrapping him in her arms, her voice breaking. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't. The broken rocket wasn't just plastic. It was Theo's last tether to his father, shattered by Marissa's hands. I turned to her, my voice trembling with rage. "What have you done?" She laughed, nervous but defiant. "It's just a cake, Elowen. Lighten up." The plot twist hit like a meteor. As Nora lifted Theo, I saw the rocket's broken pieces, and something snapped inside me. I realized Marissa hadn't just ruined a cake, she'd desecrated a shrine to Theo's father. The yard grew silent, parents exchanging uneasy glances, the air heavy with judgment. Marissa stood there oblivious, as if her laughter could erase the pain. I felt 65 years of restraint unravel, my hands shaking with a fury I hadn't known since my own childhood betrayals. Theo's sobs were a call to action, and I knew I'd do whatever it took to make this right. The backyard felt like a stage after a tragedy, the air heavy with Theo's sobs. My grandson clung to Nora, his astronaut costume smeared with silver frosting, the broken rocket at his feet a cruel reminder of his father's absence. At 65, I'd seen my share of family squabbles, but this was different. Marissa's laugh, sharp as broken glass, still hung in the air. She stood by the ruined cake, hands on hips, as if she'd told a brilliant joke. I stepped toward her, my heart pounding, my voice low but steady. "You've broken more than a cake, Marissa." Her eyes rolled, dismissing me as if I were a fussy librarian scolding a late return. Theo's friends stood frozen, their glitter-painted faces pale. Little Mia clutched her mother's hand, whispering, "Why'd she do that?" Other parents, there to pick up their kids, exchanged looks, their discomfort a silent chorus. Nora held Theo tighter, her nurse's calm cracking, her eyes wet with fury and grief. Victor, Marissa's husband, pushed through the crowd, his voice booming. "It's just a prank, Elowen. Don't make a scene." His defense was predictable, a reflex honed over years of shielding Marissa. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, sat quietly at the table, her 80-year-old hands folded, her gaze sharp as a blade. She spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Marissa, explain yourself." Now, Marissa faltered, her confidence flickering. "I was just having fun," she said, her tone defensive, a child caught stealing. Beatrice's eyes narrowed, unyielding. "Fun doesn't make a boy cry." I felt a surge of gratitude for her, but my anger burned hotter. "Iros, I told you not to do this, Marissa. You hurt Theo." She shrugged, unfazed, as if Theo's tears were a minor inconvenience. Victor stepped closer, his face red. "Don't talk to my wife like that." Nora, still cradling Theo, whispered, "This wasn't just a cake." The parents murmured, some gathering their kids to leave, the party unraveling like a dropped spool of thread. Then came the plot twist, a knife to the heart of our family's pretense. I pulled out my phone. My hand steadied despite the rage inside me. I'd recorded Marissa's cruel words from that dinner weeks ago, her mocking Theo's grief, calling him too soft. I pressed play, and her voice filled the yard, cold and biting. "He's crying over a dead dad. He needs to get over it." The words landed like a slap. Marissa's face drained of color, her eyes darting to Victor, who stood silent, his jaw tight. The parents gasped, one mother pulling her son closer. Theo's sobs softened, but his eyes lifted, meeting mine, a spark of recognition in them. He knew I was fighting for him. The recording exposed Marissa's heart, raw and unfiltered. Beatrice stood, her voice calm but ironclad. "You were warned, Marissa." "Why?" Marissa stammered. "I didn't mean it like that." But the truth was out, a wound laid bare. Victor's silence spoke louder than his usual defense, his eyes avoiding hers. The other families began to leave, their footsteps quiet, their glances heavy with judgment. I felt the weight of 65 years, the battles I'd fought in silence, and knew this was no longer about a cake. It was about Theo's right to grieve, to be seen. I looked at Beatrice, her nod a silent vow. We'd make this right, even if it meant tearing our family apart. The living room in Beatrice's Portland home felt like a courtroom, the air thick with unspoken verdicts. I'd seen families fray, but never like this, never with Theo's broken rocket haunting my thoughts. Beatrice sat in her armchair, her 80-year-old frame rigid, her eyes scanning us like a judge. Victor slouched on the couch, his face dark with resentment. Marissa sat in the corner, her sequined confidence replaced by a nervous fidgeting, her hands twisting a tissue. Nora held my hand, her nurse's steadiness faltering, Theo's absence a wound we all felt. I'd left him at home, his eyes still red, his trust in family shattered. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, a gray-suited man with a worn briefcase, opened a folder, his voice flat. "Mrs. Beatrice Caldwell has requested an update to her will." Beatrice stood, her voice clear, cutting through the room's tension. "Victor, you're out of the will. The house, worth 600,000, is no longer yours." Victor's face flushed, his fists clenching. That house was his anchor, his plan for a secure retirement. He'd spent years tending its garden, polishing its floors, assuming it would be his. Marissa gasped, her eyes wide, but Beatrice wasn't done. "Marissa, you have 7 days to apologize to Theo, sincerely, or you're out too." Mr. Hargrove read on, his words precise. "Assets will be split, Nora 30%, Elowen 30%, Theo 30%, held in trust until he's 18. My heart caught, not for the money, but for what it meant for Theo's future. The plot twist landed like a quiet thunderclap. Beatrice leaned forward, her voice softer but firm. "The remaining 10% will fund a children's grief counseling program in the name of Theo's father, Daniel." I froze, my breath shallow. Daniel, my son-in-law, whose laugh once filled this room, would live on through this gift. The charity wasn't just money, it was a legacy for Theo, a way to heal others carrying his same pain. Victor slammed his hand on the table, his voice raw. "You can't do this, Beatrice. I've cared for you." Beatrice met his gaze, unyielding. "You cared for me, but you let Marissa hurt my great-grandson. Respect starts with family." Marissa's tears came fast, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt him." But her words felt hollow, a reflex, not remorse. Nora squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening, a silent acknowledgement of Beatrice's courage. Victor stormed out, the door slamming, the sound echoing like a gavel. Marissa sat, sobbing, her tissue shredded, but she still muttered, "It was just a cake." I felt a pang of pity, but it faded against the memory of Theo's cracked rocket. Beatrice's decision wasn't about punishment, it was about principle, about teaching a family that had forgotten how to value a child's heart. I thought of my years as a librarian, shelving stories of betrayal and redemption, never imagining I'd live one. The room grew still, the weight of Beatrice's words settling. Nora whispered, "She's right, Mom." I nodded, my throat tight, knowing this was bigger than us. It was about Theo, about ensuring he'd grow up knowing his pain mattered. Marissa's eyes darted, seeking an ally, but found only silence. Victor's absence left a void, his rage a sign he felt the loss. I looked at Beatrice, her face lined with resolve, and knew she'd set us on a path where respect would be non-negotiable, even if it meant breaking our family to rebuild it stronger. The week after Beatrice rewrote her will, our Portland family felt like a house with cracked foundations. I'd seen time heal wounds, but not this kind. Theo's broken rocket sat on my kitchen counter, its red fins split, a relic of his father's love. I'd catch Nora staring at it, her nurse's hands idle, her eyes heavy with guilt for trusting Marissa. Theo, only 10, stayed quiet, sketching stars in his notebook, his silence louder than any cry. Marissa had 7 days to apologize to salvage her place in Beatrice's 600,000 will. I wanted to believe she'd change, that my sister, beneath her sequined armor, could see Theo's pain. But hope felt like a book I'd miss, shelved, out of reach. Victor called Beatrice daily, his voice a mix of pleading and rage. "You're tearing us apart," he said, as if Marissa's act hadn't lit the fuse. Beatrice, 80 and unyielding, replied simply, "An apology costs nothing." Marissa, meanwhile, sat at her desk, drafting emails she never sent. I heard from Nora, who'd spoken to Victor, that Marissa spent hours staring at her screen, typing, deleting, unable to admit fault. Her silence was a choice, a refusal to face the boy she'd hurt. I thought of my years as a librarian, cataloging stories of redemption, and wondered if Marissa's heart was too brittle to bend. On day 3, Victor came to my house, his face lined with sleepless nights. He stood in my doorway, his voice low. "Elowen, talk to Beatrice. She listens to you." I shook my head, my hands steady on the doorframe. "Marissa needs to apologize, Victor, not me." He left, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his enabling years settling. Nora, watching from the kitchen, was starting to see it. I nodded, but my heart ached. Victor's regret couldn't undo Theo's tears, couldn't mend the rocket. I sat with Theo that evening, watching him draw. His small voice broke the silence. "Grandma, why doesn't Aunt Marissa like me?" The question cut deeper than any sledgehammer. By day 5, Marissa called me, her voice shaky. "Can I see Theo?" she asked. I paused, my throat tight. "Are you ready to apologize?" She hesitated, then said, "I want to explain." I hung up, my heart sinking. An explanation wasn't remorse, deflection. Nora, overhearing, set her jaw. If she can't own it, she doesn't get near him. I agreed, my resolve hardening. Theo deserved more than half-truths. I thought of Beatrice, her calm certainty, and knew she'd hold firm. The deadline loomed, a ticking clock no one could ignore. The plot twist came on day 7, raw and unexpected. Marissa arrived at our house, her face pale, her hands clutching a folded paper. She didn't ask to see Theo, didn't speak. She handed me the paper, a drawing, not a letter. It was Theo's, one of his constellation sketches, left at Victor's house months ago. Marissa had kept it, and now in her trembling hand, it was a plea. "I'm trying," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can't say it yet." I looked at the drawing, Orion's belt in Theo's careful lines, and felt a flicker of pity. But pity wasn't enough. Theo needed sincerity, not gestures. I handed it back, my voice soft but firm. "When you're ready to apologize, we'll listen." The 7th day passed, and Marissa's name was struck from the will. Beatrice called me that evening, her voice steady. "It's done," she said. I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache. Marissa's failure was a wound, but Theo's healing was my focus. Weeks later, after therapy sessions Nora insisted on, Marissa sent a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, ink smudged with her tears. She admitted her cruelty, her blindness to Theo's grief. "I didn't see him," she wrote. "I see him now." Nora and I read it aloud to Theo, his eyes fixed on the floor. He listened, then nodded, his voice small. "I need time." Theo's response was the second twist, a quiet act of grace. He took his sketchbook, drew a new rocket, its fins sharp and whole, and wrote beneath it, "For Dad. I forgive you, Aunt Marissa." He mailed it to her, not to reconcile, but to set a boundary. At 10, he understood what Marissa had in tea. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I watched him seal the envelope, his hands steady, and felt pride swell. He was growing, not into his father's shadow, but into his own light. Marissa, shaken, began volunteering at a children's center, learning to listen, to respect. Victor, too, changed, his blind defense fading under Nora's firm gaze. He admitted to me, his voice raw, "I failed her, Elowen. I made her this way." I sat with Nora that night, the house quiet, Theo asleep with his sketchbook. We didn't speak of Marissa's letter or Victor's regret. We spoke of Theo, of the boy who'd found his voice. I thought of my own childhood, the silences I'd endured, the betrayals I'd buried. I'd learned that protecting love meant breaking things, cars, wills, even hearts, to build something stronger. Theo's drawing, his rocket soaring on paper, was proof he'd survived this. Marissa's journey was hers to walk, but Theo's was ours to guard. The family we'd been was God, that the one we were becoming felt truer, rooted in respect, not excuses. Theo's next birthday came like a quiet dawn, soft and full of promise. Beatrice's Portland backyard glowed with royal blue banners, paper stars swaying in the breeze. I'd seen celebrations fade into memory, but this one felt different, like a chapter closing and opening at once. Theo, now 11, stood taller, his eyes brighter, no longer the boy who hid behind sketches. Beatrice had planned a Stars of Courage party just for him and his 5 closest friends, the ones who stayed when Marissa's act shattered his last. Nora arranged a rocket-shaped cake, its golden icing gleaming, inscribed with, "Theo, you shine." I watched Theo laugh, his voice free, and felt a warmth I hadn't known since my librarian days, when stories mended broken hearts. Beatrice, 80 and steady, had spent a week crafting this day. She'd ordered the cake from a bakery downtown, its details precise, like Theo's own drawings. The kids ran through the yard, chasing glow in the dark planets, their laughter a melody. I stood by Nora, her nurse's hands relaxed, her smile soft. We didn't speak of Marissa, who wasn't invited, or Victor, who was rebuilding his bond with Theo through small, cautious steps. This was Theo's day, a sanctuary we'd fought to give him. Beatrice approached, her eyes twinkling, and handed Theo a wrapped box. He tore it open, revealing a telescope, its lens a window to the stars. "For your dad," she said. "He's watching." Theo hugged her, his arms tight, and I saw tears in Nora's eyes. The plot twist came at dusk, when the party quieted. Theo gathered his friends, his telescope set up on the grass. He unveiled a model rocket, one he'd built with Beatrice, its fins painted red like his father's. "This is for Dad," he said, his voice clear. He lit the fuse, and the rocket soared, a streak of light against the twilight. His friends cheered, but Theo stood still, watching it climb, his face calm. I realized then he'd found closure, not just in forgiving Marissa, but in claiming his father's memory for himself. That launch wasn't just a rocket, it was Theo's heart taking flight, free from the weight of betrayal. I shared our story on a podcast months later, my voice steady but thick with emotion. I spoke of Theo, of the boy who learned to say no, who joined an astronomy club, who taught his friends to name constellations. I spoke of Beatrice, whose hammer and will reshaped our family. Most of all, I spoke of respect, of how a child's heart is a universe, fragile but vast, deserving protection. Like a seed in barren soil, love grows when we guard it fiercely, when we refuse to let harm pass as a joke. Theo's courage, his rocket's flight, taught me that healing isn't about erasing pain, but building from it, stronger, truer. Now, I ask you, how do you protect the ones you love? What would you do if someone broke their trust? Share your story in the comments. Let's honor the courage it takes to stand up. If this moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more tales of resilience. Theo's stars shine brighter now, and so can yours. Keep fighting for what matters.